I was driving home from another long shift when I saw something on the side of the service road, a shape curled tight, half buried in dust and motor oil. At first, I thought it was a torn garbage bag, the kind that catches on fences after a storm, but when my headlights hit it, it moved. Just barely. A twitch. A breath. I pulled over before I even knew what I was doing. The air was heavy, warm like it always is in Houston evenings, and the hum of the freeway drowned out everything except my heartbeat. When I crouched down, I saw fur, if you could call it that. It was crusted with mud, grease, maybe even blood. The smell of metal and decay clung to it. I thought it was a husky, or maybe what was left of one. Its ribs rose and fell like slow waves, and every inhale sounded like a fight. I whispered, "Hey, you're okay," though neither of us believed it. Its eyes opened, a flash of pale silver under the grime, and for a second, I froze. There was fear there, but also something else. Awareness. I had nothing with me but a torn jacket and a half-empty water bottle. I poured a little near its mouth. It licked once, then trembled. That was enough. I wrapped it in my jacket, ignoring the smell, the shaking, the way the dirt smeared across my hands. Cars sped by, uncaring. The city lights flickered off puddles of oil. In that moment, all I could think was, how long had this creature been invisible here, breathing just enough to be mistaken for trash? I lifted it gently, feeling bones under fur, and whispered again, "Hold on, buddy. I've got you." Then I turned toward the glow of the nearest emergency vet, not yet knowing that what I carried wasn't a husky at all, but something wilder, older, and far from tame. The vet clinic's lights hit me like daylight after a storm. Too bright, too clean. I stumbled through the door, clutching that fragile body wrapped in my jacket, leaving a trail of mud and motor oil on the tiles. The receptionist looked up, startled, but one look at what I was carrying and she shouted for the doctor. They laid the animal on a metal table under a lamp that hummed softly. Steam rose when they poured warm water over the fur, revealing patches of raw skin beneath the grime. "Severe dehydration, undernourished," the vet murmured, his voice calm but heavy. I stood back, hands trembling, still smelling the road on my sleeves. The creature's chest lifted weakly, each breath a quiet battle. "Where did you find him?" someone asked. "Highway 288, I said. I thought it was a husky." The vet didn't answer. He just kept washing carefully, the dirt swirling down the drain like dark smoke. Beneath the filth, streaks of black began to show, not gray, not silver like a husky's coat, but deep, velvet black. The kind that swallowed the light around it. His eyes opened again, and for a moment, the room went silent. Those eyes weren't blue. They were amber, sharp, ancient. "He's young," the vet said quietly. "Maybe 7 months. But this might not be a dog." I felt the air change, that strange instinct that something sacred was lying on that table. I didn't know what he was yet, only that he'd survived something cruel. As the water ran clear and the last of the dirt fell away, I whispered to myself, "Whatever you are, you made it this far, so you're not alone anymore." They kept him overnight. I couldn't bring myself to leave, so I sat in the hallway, listening to the low hum of machines and the distant drip of IV lines. Every so often, I'd hear a soft whimper from the treatment room, and it cut through me like a blade. I kept replaying that moment on the road, how still he'd been, how close I'd come to driving past him. When morning came, the vet stepped out, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "He's stable," he said, "but you should see this." Inside, under the soft light of a heat lamp, the creature lay curled on a clean blanket. His coat, now washed and brushed, gleamed like liquid shadow. Not the patterned gray I'd expected from a husky, but pure black, a deep, silken darkness that shimmered when he breathed. His face was longer, leaner. His paws, enormous. His gaze, when it met mine, was steady and wild all at once. "That's not a dog," the vet finally said. "That's a wolf. Melanistic, rare." The word hit me like thunder. A wolf. In Houston. Found by a freeway, surviving on garbage and rainwater. I didn't know whether to be afraid or awed. He didn't snarl, didn't cower, just watched me, his amber eyes unreadable. I crouched beside the cage. "Hey," I whispered, "you're safe now." For the first time, his ears flicked toward my voice. A small movement, but enough to feel like the beginning of something. As the city woke beyond the windows, car horns, morning traffic, the smell of coffee drifting in, I realized that whatever this creature was, our stories had already intertwined. And I couldn't walk away. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of waiting, checking, hoping. The wolf, though I still caught myself calling him the husky in my head, was fragile but alert. He wouldn't let anyone touch him except the vet, and even that was a tense truce. When I came near, he stiffened, eyes tracking every move. But he didn't growl. That, somehow, felt like trust in its first fragile form. I brought food each morning. Boiled chicken, rice, clean water. I'd place it near the edge of his cage and sit quietly on the floor, not looking at him directly. Just being there. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp fur. Sometimes he'd shift closer, his paws brushing the bars. Other times, he'd retreat to the far corner, watching. The vet told me he was recovering fast, too fast for a dog that weak. Wolves don't break easy, he said, half to himself. Their will to survive is something else. That night, a thunderstorm rolled through Houston. The power flickered, the rain drummed against the roof like a heartbeat. I found myself driving back to the clinic. No umbrella, just a feeling I couldn't explain. When I walked in, the lights were dim. He was pacing, restless, the stormlight flashing in his eyes like fire. I spoke softly, almost without thinking. "It's okay. You're safe." My voice barely rose above the rain. He froze, nostrils flaring, then slowly sat down. I could see his reflection in the metal table, soaked, scarred, but alive. In that quiet with the storm howling outside, I realized I wasn't just trying to save him anymore. I needed to. Because somewhere in that trembling body and wary stare, I saw myself, the part that had forgotten what it felt like to be found. By the end of the week, they said he could leave the clinic. The vet hesitated before signing the discharge papers, glancing at me. "He's not a pet," he warned softly. "He's wild. He'll need space, quiet, and someone who understands what that means." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did. I'd worked in animal rescue for years, mostly with strays, abandoned dogs, the occasional injured raccoon. But this was different. When I opened the carrier door, he didn't bolt or snarl. He just stood there, tall now, his coat still uneven, but shining black like wet stone. The sunlight hit his fur, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as a victim, but as something fierce that had survived everything meant to break him. I named him Shadow. It fit him, the way he moved, silent and watchful, the way his presence filled a space without sound. I brought him home to my small place on the outskirts of Houston. The house backed up to a patch of woods that led into miles of greenbelt. I left the back door open so he could come and go, though for the first few days, he didn't move far. He'd pace, then curl in the corner by the kitchen window, head on his paws, eyes half open. At night, I'd sit nearby, reading out loud just to fill the silence. Sometimes he'd lift his head at the sound of my voice. Other times, he'd close his eyes and sigh. This deep, almost human sound that felt like surrender. He didn't trust me yet, but he hadn't run. And somehow, that small choice to stay felt like the first real rescue of all. The days that followed were a lesson in patience. He ate cautiously, one bite at a time, as if every meal might be his last. I learned to move slowly, to speak less, to let silence be the language between us. The hum of Houston traffic faded in the distance, replaced by the rustle of wind through the backyard trees. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the open sky, nostrils flaring, as if remembering something far away. One morning, I woke before sunrise and found him standing by the door. The world outside was painted in fog, the streetlights dim halos in the mist. I slid the door open and he stepped out, no leash, no hesitation. I followed at a distance, barefoot on the wet grass. He walked toward the tree line, each step measured. For a moment, I thought he'd disappear. But then he stopped, turned his head slightly, and waited. Just enough for me to catch up. Together we stood there, the city hummed behind us, the whisper of crickets ahead. It felt like the line between wild and human had blurred, just a little. When the sun rose, its light caught his coat, turning the black fur almost blue. He closed his eyes and lifted his nose to the air, breathing deeply, like he finally remembered what peace smelled like. That night, he came back inside on his own. Curled near the door, he rested his head on his paws. I whispered, "Good boy." And though he didn't move, his tail flicked once. Barely there, but enough. It was the first time he'd let himself rest in the same room as me. And for a creature born to vanish, that was trust in its purest form. He started changing in small, almost invisible ways. The first time I noticed was when I dropped a bowl in the kitchen. It clattered loud against the tile, and instead of bolting, he just flinched, then looked at me, waiting to see what I'd do. That pause, that choice to stay, was everything. Each morning, I'd leave the door open so he could wander outside. Sometimes he'd vanish into the trees for hours. I'd listen for the faint crunch of leaves or the low rustle that meant he was near. He always came back before dark, coat glistening with dew, eyes calm, steady. One afternoon, as the Houston sun burned gold through the fence slats, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. He approached slowly, silent as smoke, and stopped right beside me. I didn't move. After a long moment, he lowered his head, resting it near my leg. Not touching, not asking, just being there. My throat tightened. I barely breathed. The city in the distance kept roaring, uncaring, but in that small patch of backyard, time felt suspended. His fur shimmered, every strand catching light like polished coal. I reached out, fingers trembling, and let my hand hover just above his back. He didn't pull away. For the first time, I felt his warmth, not wild, not threatening, just alive. I whispered, "You made it home, didn't you?" He blinked slowly, a soundless acknowledgement, then turned his gaze to the horizon. And in that quiet stillness, I realized he wasn't the only one learning to trust again. A week later, the rhythm between us felt almost natural. He'd come and go with the dawn, slipping through the trees like a shadow, and return by evening to rest near the porch. The fear in his eyes had softened into something calmer, cautious still, but curious. That morning, I woke to a strange sound, a low rumble, not a growl, but something deeper. When I stepped outside, I found him standing alert near the edge of the yard, his body tense, head low. A stray dog had wandered in, thin and lost, ribs showing beneath a patchy coat. For a moment, I feared what he might do. But instead of attacking, he stood between me and the stranger, silent but protective, tail low, eyes sharp. When I called softly, he looked back, as if asking what I wanted him to do. I whispered, "It's okay," and his posture eased. The stray backed away, and he didn't chase, just watched until it disappeared down the road. Then he turned to me, his breath steady, and sat. Something changed in that moment. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was awareness of me, of this place, of what safety felt like. I walked closer, knelt beside him, and for the first time, laid my hand on his back. His fur was warm, dense, alive. He exhaled slowly, almost like a sigh, and let me keep it there. The wind carried the faint smell of rain from the city. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. But here, in this quiet corner of Houston, a wild heart had chosen stillness, and I had been allowed to witness it. He began following me. Not always close, but always near. A silent presence a few steps behind as I worked in the yard, fixed the fence, or carried groceries from the truck. I never asked him to. He just did. Sometimes I'd glance over my shoulder and find those amber eyes watching, steady and calm. It wasn't ownership. It was something quieter. Recognition. One evening, I was repairing a broken gutter when I slipped off the ladder. The fall wasn't far, but it knocked the wind out of me. Before I could even sit up, he was there. Not charging, not panicking, just standing between me and the open space, body rigid, gaze scanning the tree line. Guarding. When I finally managed to breathe again, I laughed softly. "You're watching out for me now, huh?" He tilted his head as if the sound of my voice was something worth decoding. Then, slowly, he sat down beside me. We stayed like that for a while, man and wolf, breathing the same warm Houston air, crickets pulsing in the background like a heartbeat. Later that night, as I sat on the porch, he came closer than ever before. The porch light flickered, casting gold across his fur. He rested his head against my knee, tentative, testing, and stayed there. His breath was slow, deep, steady. I didn't move. I didn't speak. That small moment, the weight of his head, the trust in that gesture, said more than words ever could. It wasn't rescue anymore. It was belonging. Two broken things that somehow found balance in each other's silence. Weeks passed, and Houston's summer bled into fall. The air turned softer, the nights longer, and the world around us seemed to quiet down. He had filled out now. Strong shoulders, sleek black fur catching every flicker of light. When he ran through the yard, he moved like smoke through wind, effortless and alive. Sometimes I'd catch neighbors staring through their fences, whispering, "Is that a wolf?" they'd ask. I'd just smile and say, "He's family." Because by then, that's what he was. Not a pet, not something I owned, but a soul that had chosen to stay. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, I sat on the porch watching him. He lifted his head to the breeze, listening to something only he could hear. Distant, ancient, calling. I thought maybe he'd go one day, that the wild would pull him back. And if it did, I'd let him. Because love, real love, isn't about keeping. It's about freeing. But that night, he didn't leave. Instead, he walked toward me, slow and steady, and rested his muzzle on my arm. I felt his breath, warm and calm, and I knew he'd chosen this life, this strange corner of the city, this quiet bond between two survivors. The cicadas hummed, the streetlights flickered, and somewhere beyond the trees, a siren wailed into the distance. I looked into those amber eyes, once wild with fear, now soft with peace. I whispered, "You're home." And for the first time, he closed his eyes, not in defense, not in exhaustion, but in trust. The kind that doesn't need words, the kind that stays.